Okay, so you know how it is, right? Like you're in this thing, this long-term relationship, you're committed, you're all in, but then there are those days when like all those little quirks your partner has, they suddenly go from like, oh, that's cute, to like, deal breaker, I'm out of here.
Chuckles.
Like that sock thing, the one sock on the floor. Normally, I'm fine, whatever. But today it means the world is ending.
Yeah, I hear you.
And it turns out it's not just me, right? Even those like ridiculously happy couples we all secretly envy,
Right.
they go through phases of, well, let's just say it's not liking each other very much.
Yeah, it's more common than people think.
Even Jamie Lee Curtis admitted to it, which honestly is hugely validating for the rest of us mere mortals.
It really is. That Jamie Lee Curtis interview really struck a nerve.
Oh, totally.
And you know what I think it is? It's that she said the thing nobody ever says, which is just because you have moments of disliking your partner doesn't mean your relationship is over.
Okay, so that's good news.
It's all about how you handle those feelings. That's what matters.
Right, the handling.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's reassuring and all, but like, HW, how do we actually do that? Thankfully, unlike most of us just muddling through, we've got experts for this.
Chuckles.
Jane Greer, she's a marriage therapist, and she says that whole unconditional love thing, bit of a trap, actually. It sets us up for failure. Because who actually likes another human being 24/7?
Right. Unrealistic expectations right there.
Thought.
Greer's point, and I think it's a good one,
Yeah.
is that we got to acknowledge the negative stuff too. The frustration, the resentment, yeah, even those fleeting moments of dislike.
Yeah, get it all out in the open.
Because then we can get to the bottom of it.
To the WHY.
Exactly. Like that sock on the floor. Maybe it's not really about the sock.
It's never really about the sock, is it?
Right. It could be about feeling unseen in the relationship or unappreciated or like your needs aren't being met.
And if you don't deal with that underlying stuff,
Oh, then you're headed for trouble.
like DEFCON 1 relationship meltdown.
Struggles over a sock. Yeah.
Been there.
Yeah.
You have this huge blow-up fight. 3 hours later, you're like, wait, were we really yelling about whose turn it was to empty the dishwasher?
The worst.
So how do we actually avoid that?
Well, there's a sociology professor, Terri Orbuch. She's studied relationships for decades. Fascinating stuff. And she says it's all about catching things early.
Okay, so like preventative relationship maintenance.
Exactly. Address those little issues as they come up.
Don't let them fester.
Right. Calmly, privately, no need to make it a big dramatic production. Especially if you've got kids, they pick up on everything.
Oh my gosh, yes. They're like little emotional sponges, aren't they?
Right. And if they're constantly seeing conflict as the model.
That's what they learn.
Exactly.
So deal with it early, deal with it calmly, got it.
And Orbuch has this really neat tool she talks about. She calls it the XYZ statement.
XYZ statement, catchy.
It helps you shift from blaming to explaining.
Instead of you always do X.
It's when you did X in situation Y, it made me feel Z.
Okay, so it's about the impact of the behavior, not just the behavior itself.
Exactly. So not you always leave your socks on the floor.
Which, let's be real, is just asking for a defensive counterargument.
Right. Instead, it's when you leave your socks on the floor after I've just tidied up.
It makes me feel like you don't respect my effort to keep our shared space tidy.
And that makes me feel a little hurt and unappreciated.
Oh, wow. See, that's so different.
Right. It completely changes the tone.
You're not saying you are the problem. You're saying this behavior causes this problem for me.
And that's a game changer for communication.
Because it invites empathy instead of defensiveness.
Exactly. And suddenly you're having a productive conversation.
Instead of, World War III over laundry.
Chuckles. Exactly. And remember, the goal isn't to win the argument.
It's to actually understand each other.
Exactly. To be seen and heard and to extend that same understanding to your partner.
Okay, so much good stuff already. We've tackled the fact that those not-so-positive feelings are totally normal. And we've learned a super useful tool for actually talking about them constructively.
Absolutely.
But what about the positive side? It can't just be all damage control and managing the negative, right? We need to actively be loving, too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like tending a garden. You can't just pull weeds. You got to plant flowers, too.
Love the garden analogy. So we're talking like relationships need sunshine and water, not just bug spray for the icky stuff.
Exactly.
And speaking of tending those metaphorical flowers, Greer talks about that too. She says, it's not enough to just manage the negativity. You've got to actively, cultivate positive emotions and experiences too.
Yes. It's like making deposits into a relationship bank account.
Oh, I like that.
Every act of kindness, every time you say, hey, I appreciate you, every little shared moment of joy, that's a deposit.
Okay.
Then, when those inevitable moments of frustration hit, you've got something to draw on.
That makes so much sense. I can really picture that, like visually.
Mm.
Because, yeah, if the account's always running on empty, even like a small overdraft fee, like a dumb argument about whose turn it was to unload the dishwasher,
Yeah,
it feels like a crisis.
exactly.
Whereas if there's a healthy balance, you can weather those withdrawals without like the whole thing blowing up.
Absolutely.
So how do we make those deposits then? Like what are we talking about here? I mean, beyond the obvious big stuff like vacations, fancy gifts, those aren't exactly everyday things, are they?
And they don't have to be. It's often the small, consistent actions that really add up over time.
Yeah.
Think about what makes your partner feel seen, appreciated.
Okay.
Maybe it's just remembering to pick up their favorite coffee on your way home. Maybe it's just offering a listening ear after they've had a really long day.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just remembering to say thank you, expressing gratitude for something they do.
Okay, so it's about being present in those everyday moments, like intentionally present.
Exactly.
But what about what about when things really hit the fan? When we're talking like full-blown dislike spiraling into a massive argument, how do you love your way through that?
Well, that's where this whole idea of love as a verb, as an active choice, really becomes crucial
Okay.
because it's easy to love when it feels good, right?
Yeah.
When our partner is meeting our needs, when life is smooth sailing. But what about when the seas get rough? When those waves of frustration and, yes, even dislike start to rise, what do we do then?
You're talking about those moments when, like, even the sound of your partner breathing suddenly feels like an Olympic sport and annoyance.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And those are the moments, right, that really test the strength of our commitment. They challenge us to really dig deep into our reserves of understanding, patience, and, yes, even love.
Yeah, because in those moments, let's be real, love can feel like a pretty tall order. It's more like, at that point, I'd rather be right than in this relationship right now.
It can.
Yeah.
And that's where the distinction between love as a feeling and love as an action becomes so important.
Okay, so less about those warm, fuzzy feelings
Less about the feeling, more about the actions.
and more about choosing to act lovingly, even when you're, like, feeling the opposite.
Exactly. And that starts with awareness. Noticing those negative feelings, but without judgment.
Okay.
Acknowledging their presence without letting them dictate your actions or turn into something hurtful.
So instead of immediately snapping at our partner or, like, withdrawing into ourselves, we take a moment to just pause and reflect.
Precisely.
Like hitting the pause button on the argument before it even starts.
Exactly. We create space for understanding, for ourselves and for our partner.
Um,
We ask ourselves, what's really going on here? What's driving these feelings? Is this really about them leaving the kitchen light on again? Or is it about something bigger that I haven't addressed?
Because sometimes that dislike that we're feeling, it's just a symptom of some other, like, deeper issue.
Often, yes.
Maybe we're feeling unheard or unappreciated, and that frustration is just, like, bubbling over onto something that's totally unrelated.
Exactly. And once we understand what's truly at the root of those feelings, then we can communicate them in a way that fosters connection rather than conflict. Which brings us back to those XYZ statements.
Right. So instead of, like, you always leave the kitchen light on? Are you trying to drive me crazy?
Oh, yeah.
It's more like,
It's more like, hey, when you leave the kitchen light on, after I've already turned it off, it makes me feel like my efforts to save energy aren't being considered. And that makes me feel a little frustrated.
you see, the tone of that is just completely different, right?
Right.
It's not an attack, it's an explanation. And it opens the door for your partner to actually understand where you're coming from without feeling immediately defensive.
Exactly. It's about expressing your needs and your feelings without resorting to blame or criticism. It's about seeking to understand, not about being right.
Which, let's be real, that's hard to do.
Yeah,
Especially in the heat of the moment when those, like, fight or flight instincts kick in.
it is.
Yeah.
And that's where patience comes in. Patience with ourselves for not always getting it right.
Yeah.
Patience with our partner for being, well, perfectly imperfect human beings.
Right.
And patience with the process. Because let's face it, building a strong, healthy relationship, that takes time
Yeah.
and consistent effort.
It's like learning any new skill, right?
Absolutely.
Like, it's awkward and messy at first, but with practice, it becomes more natural.
Exactly. And just like with any skill, there will be setbacks. There will be moments of frustration and times when Honestly, we just want to give up.
Right.
But it's in those moments when we choose love, even when it's hard, that we not only strengthen our bond with our partner, but we also cultivate something truly remarkable within ourselves.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more about this something remarkable. What is that?
Well, think about it this way. When we consistently choose to respond to challenges with love, with understanding, with a commitment to growth, what are we doing? We're building resilience. We're developing our capacity for empathy, for compassion, for forgiveness, and ultimately we're deepening our own understanding of what it truly means to love and be loved,
Yeah.
imperfections and all.
That's a really powerful way to frame it. It's not just about the relationship itself. It's about the personal growth that's happening within us as individuals as we navigate these inevitable challenges.
Exactly. It's about becoming the best versions of ourselves, both for our own well-being and for the well-being of our relationships.
So we've been talking about this whole love as a verb
Hmm.
thing, right? Especially when you're dealing with those moments where maybe your partner isn't your favorite person at that exact moment.
Hmm.
But this whole idea, it's like bigger than just romance, isn't it? This whole choosing to love even when it's tough.
You're absolutely right. It applies to so many other relationships. Friendships, family dynamics, even those, let's face it, sometimes tricky coworker relationships.
Oh, tell me about it.
Because think about it, right? Have you ever felt frustrated with a friend or impatient with a family member?
Oh, all the time. I mean, sometimes my own sister drives me completely up the wall,
Yeah.
and I adore her.
Family, right.
It's like they have a special discount on knowing exactly which buttons to push.
Exactly. And I think that's an important point, right? Because with a partner, there's this expectation of forever. So working through those tough moments, it feels more important, you know?
You're committed. You got to make it work.
Exactly. But with other relationships, it's easier to just, I don't know, step back a little.
Like less one-on-one time, fewer heart-to-hearts.
Yeah, create some distance.
But is that, I don't know, are we missing out on that love as a verb opportunity then?
It's definitely something to think about because here's the thing, right? Whether it's a romantic relationship, a close friendship, even that coworker you just can't seem to see eye to eye with, those moments of frustration, of dislike, they offer us a choice.
Okay, I'm listening.
We can let those feelings fester, build walls, or we can choose to approach them with the same tools we've been talking about.
So that means asking ourselves what's really going on.
Exactly.
And then, like we talked about, communicating our needs clearly, but, with compassion.
The XYZ statements, remember?
Right, right. And that whole patience thing, which is always easier said than done.
It all still applies.
So it's about showing up for all our relationships with that same, intentionality.
Exactly.
With that same commitment to growth that we, hopefully, bring to our romantic relationships.
It's about recognizing that any relationship, it takes effort, it takes understanding, and this willingness to, ride out those inevitable rough patches.
Because just like those ways we were talking about before, right, conflict, it's a natural part of being in a relationship. It's how we choose to ride those waves that determines if the relationship stays afloat.
I love that analogy. Are we paddling in sync or are we, clinging to the wreckage?
Exactly.
And here's the amazing thing. The more we practice these skills, the more we use that love as a verb muscle, the more it becomes second nature.
It becomes a habit like anything else.
It's like building a toolkit for connection, for navigating all those complicated, messy, wonderful dynamics that make up a human life.
I love that. A toolkit for connection. Okay, that's going on a t-shirt for sure.
Mm.
So it's not about never feeling annoyed, never feeling frustrated, because let's be real, that's never going to happen.
Nope, not in this lifetime.
It's about changing how we respond to those moments.
Exactly. Choosing understanding over judgment, choosing communication over silence, and choosing love as an active, ongoing practice.
Wow, this deep dive has been incredible. So many aha moments. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on how to really show up for the people in my life, even when it's hard.
And that's what it's all about, right? Because those connections, the bonds we build, they're everything. They're the heart and soul of life well lived.
So well said. Well, that about wraps it up for today's deep dive. But for all of you listening out there, keep exploring these ideas, keep those conversations going, because the world needs more of that. More understanding, more compassion, more connection.
I couldn't agree more.
That's all the time we have for today. Until next time, keep diving deep.